Good afternoon, everyone. People coming in now, yeah, great. See lots of people joining, some familiar names and faces, and masks. So great to see everyone. Welcome to the EOcafe, where we community meet. Reminder: we started this as a means. It's almost 2 years ago. In fact, our next EOcafe will be our 2-year anniversary, so we're looking to try and do something there. The idea being to give somewhere people that could meet whilst they weren't able to travel. As things are opening up now, more and more trips are happening, more and more physical meetings are taking place, but we still keep the EOcafe going. There seems to be a lot of interest in it and what we can do. But one of the new objectives we've taken on is to try to help people understand how the sector is set up in Europe. And it's very complicated with a lot of players. So increasingly we try to bring some of the institutional players into the picture, and to inform and educate, as well as entertain and keep people in contact. Just a reminder of the rules. You're very welcome to keep your cameras on. It's nice to see people. It's nice to stay in contact, but keep your microphones off, microphones on mute, unless we take your question to come in and ask your question directly. For questions, please put them into the chat so that our guests can see what's coming up and maybe be prepared, and also then we can call you to come in. So that's just the rules. Today I'm very happy to welcome Mark Dowell to the EOcafe. Mark is in the European Commission Joint Research Centre in Ispra in northern Italy, a really nice place. And Mark is leading the European Commission effort, which is focused on the JRC, on the Knowledge Centre on Earth Observation. And so that's what we're going to try and discuss today, and understand a little bit more what that means, what it's all about, and Mark will explain. And I hope my dog is not going to cause too much, because she's starting to bark in the background. So welcome very much, Mark. Welcome to the EOcafe. We tried to have a very informal discussion, and hopefully that will be the case today. Maybe I could just ask you to start off, say a few words about yourself and how you fit into the JRC, and then later on perhaps we can come on to what is the JRC and what it does. Please, I'll turn my microphone off to cut out the dog, and if I disappear, it's because I can't just shut her up.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeff. Anyway, and good evening, everyone. I guess at this point already almost. It's very good to be here. I had an opportunity, I guess around 6 weeks ago, to have a chat with your board, but I'm very pleased to kind of speak more broadly to the ERSC community. So maybe I'll start with a little bit of background on myself, so you know kind of where I'm coming from and my context. As Jeff said, I'm currently leading this new knowledge center on Earth observation, which here at the Joint Research Center, and I'll go into detail on that knowledge center later on. I actually started I started here at the JRC and finished my PhD actually in 1998. So as many of you will know, that is the year of the first meeting in Baveno that had the Baveno Manifesto. I'd actually started here a couple of years before that. So I kind of lived through those early days of preparing for the original kind of GMES program, which then went on to become the Copernicus program, of course. And so I was registered at the University of Southampton, where I did a PhD in oceanography and earth science. And then in 2000, after a grant here, I left to go to the United States, where I worked at the Institutes for Earth, Ocean and Space at the University of New Hampshire, when Berrien Moore, who some of you will know, was still director there. And I stayed in the US till 2004, came back as an official in the commission to work here at the JRC. And I've really worked over the last, well, almost 20 years now here on kind of Earth observation related issues, starting on kind of the marine and inland water side, and then moving on to climate issues for lands and ocean, and then increasingly more on kind of the coordination of the JRC activities. And now, apart from the Knowledge Centre work, I'm basically coordinating a series of projects that provide scientific and technical support to Copernicus. I should perhaps mention that I've also been involved quite a bit at the international level, and actually have interacted with some ERSC members in that context. Through programs in CEOS, in GEO. I actually spent a year back in Brussels in 2018 when the Commission for the first time chaired CEOS, the Committee for Earth Observation Satellites. And I've been supporting as well the colleagues in DEFIS on a lot of the international dialogues with third countries. So that's also been kind of a part of the work that I've been doing. I think you could say that now kind of the main emphasis of a lot of the work, regardless of this new knowledge centre, has really been on trying to kind of incentivize the uptake of Earth observation in policy and making sure that it's technically and scientifically sound what we're proposing to the user DGs in the Commission as far as the use of Earth observation for their needs. So that's kind of the broad sense of where I am myself at the moment. So Jeff, I don't know, shall I go on straight away a bit about the JRC, or do you want to come in?
No, just to really observe, we have two things in common in our backgrounds then, Baveno and Southampton University.
Okay.
Two factors.
Yeah, but I didn't know about Southampton, but that's a happy coincidence, let's say.
But I was on the engineering side, not on the oceanography side, so okay. And obviously quite a few years apart. You're quite a lot younger than I am. Yeah, as I said in the introduction, we're trying to. There's a lot of new players coming into the game, a lot of new startup companies, and just to say that this the EOcafe is focused on ERSC, and we give priority to ERSC members, but it's not exclusively ERSC members, and we do have people from other institutions and other parts of the sector as well, so it is open. But we're trying to help people understand what the setup is. So could you just say a little bit about the role of the JRC in the Commission?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure many of you are kind of aware of the, whether you're in ERSC or not, you've probably heard at least of the framework program funding in Europe that funds research. So in the past, until the beginning of last year, Horizon 2020, now we have Horizon Europe. And so these are kind of research actions that the Commission takes to fund projects and research in different areas. But at the same time, the Commission has its own in-house scientific capability, and this is the Joint Research Centre. So the Joint Research Centre is there really to kind of provide scientific underpinning to a lot of the work that the Commission services do in implementing policy. We address a variety of topics that are relevant to different policy areas, and we're really there to provide kind of the best or to inform the Commission services on the best and latest science. We also, of course, undertake our own scientific activities to kind of advance this. So we're really there to, as I said, to inform kind of the policy making from a scientific and technical point of view, and both on the implementation of their programs and kind of on the evolution of policy. So that's kind of outside of the Earth observation space, but more generally, that's kind of the JRC's role as a whole. And I should mention that we, for those who are not familiar, we have 5 sites. ISPRA is the biggest, so the one where I am based is the biggest. We have about 2,000 staff here, and there are another 1,000 staff distributed across the other sites, for example, in Sevilla, in Spain, in Gil, in Karlsruhe, in Petten, and then of course colleagues in Brussels at the headquarters where our Director General is based. The Earth observation is a part of that, and I'll go into a bit of more detail on what specifically we do there. But just to make you aware that we do cover a very broad range of areas from kind of reference materials to nuclear. We still have some nuclear research activities, to health, to kind of security and digital, broader digital issues. So that a very cross-cutting set of competences, and my own directorate is the Director for Sustainable Resources. So yeah, shall I continue with a bit more detail on the Earth observation side?
Well, I think I hope, do you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Okay, because something just changed in my setup, and I see some pictures which are frozen, so I'm hoping that everyone's still with us. But if we're here, then I guess most people are as well.
I see some people moving their heads. So
yes,
okay,
yes, we are all here.
Good. Something with my setup then. Yeah, so the JRC is a research centre involved in informing the services and helping the services understand latest technology. One of the recent initiatives is what we're here to talk about today, the Knowledge Centre for Earth Observation. So perhaps I think you have a couple of slides on this as well.
Just maybe before I start, I can't. Oh, actually, I did put a slide at the beginning. So yeah, I'll pull up my slides then. I think I just wanted, Jeff. Oh, sorry. You will remember this because, of course, you had involvement already with the JRC back then. But in reality, in the past, so back in the 1990s, early 90s. Actually, I'll just move on. Is this full screen? Can someone just confirm?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, the JRC on Earth observation in general, we've had activities now for over 30 years. And in fact, one thing that I imagine Jeff will remember is that back in the 1990s, we actually had dedicated, at that point, we didn't call our kind of organizational blocks at the larger scale directorates. We called them institutes, whereas the rest of the commission was already on directorates at that point. And we had an institute, first of all, in the early 90s for what we call the Institute for Remote Sensing Applications. And then just before Baveno, that became the Space Applications Institute. And then what happened, actually, while I was in the US, so I can't take any blame or credit for this, was that they decided that they basically wanted to mainstream within the JRC these activities in the different kind of thematic scientific units. So basically the staff that was in this Space Applications Institute was allocated to different thematic competences. And okay, I don't know, there are still some people who kind of regret not having that centralized competence base on Earth observation. But I think in general, it's been quite positive in the sense that now we have colleagues, and I'll show you in a moment, across the different thematic areas that really have a direct interface to the thematic policy makers who are their counterparts. And so therefore they can really think, and this is my point 4 on this slide, which is that I think really the thing that makes the JRC a bit different to other institutions working on research on Earth observation science is really that we kind of maintain this very direct link to the policy needs at a very thematic level. And I can show this now if I just show you how this won't mean anything to you if you don't understand the units, but on the right-hand side here, I've listed the different units with the kind of basic thematic areas that they have competences in. And the blue circles here are the units in the directorate where I am. So you can see that's kind of a critical mass. The size of the circles here are basically the research output in publications over a certain time frame. And then the red circles are kind of our sister directorate, which also hosts the Emergency Management Service, which are responsible more for civil protection and security issues. whereas our directorate, of course, most of the other environmental aspects. But also there are other aspects of the JRC. The colleagues here in green are working more on some of the digital architecture aspects, so things like the DS and other data systems. And the colleagues here, I3 is the internal unit that kind of manage our own big data system, the JRC Earth observation big data system. So it's very distributed now, and you can see the different competence areas here going from global kind of scale aspects in our own unit, dealing with climate, biodiversity, desertification. Of course, the other unit running a service is the emergency management aspects, but we have units on forest resources, on coasts and marine, agriculture, air quality, and methane, security. So across a very broad range of topics. And as I said, this really allows us, really at the level of individual units, to both kind of foster our own scientific competences, but also maintain this link to the relevant policy directorates general of the Commission, where those kind of thematic areas and policies are being addressed. And so I think this works fairly well. And one of my jobs is basically to kind of coordinate across these units, especially with regard to the fairly large administrative arrangement that we have with DG DEFIS on looking at how we provide support to them. And just finally on the JRC side, before maybe we switch gears more onto the KCEO, is that, of course, this is also reflected in the new space program regulation, and was actually, with very similar wording, reflected in the Copernicus regulation from 2014. Of course, here the wording is generalized for the whole space program, so it's not just on Copernicus. It recognizes, of course, the work we do on managing a couple of the services, but I think perhaps more importantly, our role in kind of reviewing the fitness for purpose with respect to the policy needs of the data information, and also helping them in thinking about the future evolution of the program and its different components. So that kind of explains a bit, I think, where we are and what the JRC's general role is. And maybe just, do you want to come in now?
No, it's fine. No, thanks for that, and I think it's good the reminder of the history in the JRC. There was also, of course, back in the 90s, the CEO, the Centre for Earth Observation.
The Centre on Earth Observation.
Yeah, wow. Which was, I think, under the Space Applications Institute at the time.
That's right. Actually, yeah. You will remember, I'm sure very well, Jeff, Pete Churchill. Yeah. And when we launched the Knowledge Centre on Earth observation last April, he sent me a message in LinkedIn and said, I recognize that acronym. Why did you add the letter to it? So yeah, no, that's right. That's very correct. There was the Centre on Earth Observation back in the 1990s, and although I would say the mandate of that was actually much broader and started to get into areas that was that are probably more of direct interest to kind of ERSC as an organisation itself.
Yeah, it was very different, but it was a very different time as well. So
no, of course, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Okay.
So then, the KCEO.
Yeah, so maybe as a little bridge between these two topics. So back in 2018, well, the Commission was starting to prepare its kind of user requirement basis for the next MFFs, or the multi-annual financial framework, sorry, that we're in at the moment. And it had to publish a user requirement document, and it did ask I think some external consultancies initially, and then made its own assessment on requirements in a staff working document that came out in 2019. But at the beginning of that process, they also asked us to basically look within the Commission at what really the policy needs and the uses were of the different Commission services. And so we kind of did this survey. We got involved really at the unit level with different DGs and kind of compiled a list of needs and potential needs, I think more interestingly, for Earth observation in addressing their policies. And I think when we finished this work, we kind of sat down with the colleagues in what was then still GROW and realized that, that this was something that needed to be done basically on a more systematic basis, and there were areas that we needed to kind of look more in depth and really almost kind of handhold the policy DGs through the process of understanding how and what they could take advantage of from an Earth observation perspective. So there was a discussion at the level of the DGs, and we agreed to establish a knowledge center. And this isn't something new. There are already a number of these knowledge centers across the Commission that address a variety of different areas. It's actually covered in the formal Commission communication. In general, there's normally co-led by the Joint Research Centre as kind of the technical arm and one of the policy DGs, but really with a membership as broad as necessary across all of the services of the Commission. And I'll show you later about the representation that we have at the moment. And so we kind of went forward with this and started reaching out to the colleagues in other directorates general and to understand their interest. And that was kind of just after as well, of course, the space strategy, where really it encouraged the Commission to use kind of the services from the space program in EU policy, and where possible to kind of promote the uptake, including through specific legislative acts where that was necessary. So that kind of gave us a foundation for what we wanted to do. And I think we knew from fairly early on that there were two main areas of work that we wanted to address. I should say that before we kind of started off, apart from discussing with DG DEFIS, we also discussed with our colleagues in DG RTD and Connect, who obviously have kind of an intimate interest themselves in Earth observation within their own programs. And then, as I said, we reached out to the much broader Commission services. But we did realize from early on that there were kind of two core areas that we wanted to address. The first was really looking at the uptake of Earth observation in policy and its use as well in policy coherence. And I'll come to a moment how we address that. And then secondly, thinking about how we mainstream Earth observation how we mainstream research and innovation investments and Earth observation specifically, so that we're really taking advantage of the opportunities across all of the different Commission programs that can resource these things. So within Horizon Europe, but also within other programs, for example, in Connect, or the evolution of the services that is directly foreseen in Copernicus itself. And of course, the JRC's institutional work program as well. We have an institutional work program where we can do targeted research on specific topics that could possibly be of interest. And whilst I'll show you a bit the structure of the KCEO in a moment, but whilst, of course, the primary constituency, I would say, of the Knowledge Centre is the different DGs of the Commission, we also realise that the Knowledge Centre needs to be open to kind of discussing and bringing in points of view and opinions from the external community. And I'll mention a couple of mechanisms of how we see this working in a bit. So this kind of provides you kind of the key scope of the Knowledge Centre. I think maybe I didn't include a slide on this, but I should probably take a moment as well to kind of say that in the context of the current European Commission, there's been very much a big emphasis on kind of incentivizing uptake across the space program, but on Earth observation specifically. Some of you will be aware of the European Court of Auditors report that was released last year, which made a couple of recommendations on areas that they thought we could be doing better. And we're actually quite critical on some aspects of how we've addressed uptake in the past. It's no coincidence well, it is a coincidence actually, that report was released one day after the launch of the Knowledge Centre. We definitely had nothing to do with that. But I think my take on that is actually we'd already started to put in place things before that report that was released that will actually address many of the recommendations. And I do think, and I'm not just saying this because I'm kind of involved in a small part of it, but I really do think the Commission has put a lot more effort in how we address uptake. Of course, the first, the kind of the headline on that is the expansion of the mandate of the ex-GSA agency, now the European Union Space Programme Agency, which will take an increased role on uptake and already have a lot of activities starting that are doing that, and will address with the needs of what are called under the regulation other users. So that's kind of downstream users in commercial private sector, as well as academia and other user communities under that. The core users, which are the users kind of in EU and European Union member state public policy entities or public entities in general, that's addressed, of course, by the member states themselves. And what we've noticed lately is really an increased emphasis on their side as well in developing their national user forums and national uptake programs. And just several presentations recently to the Copernicus User Forum, where we've seen that across many of the member states. Of course, the Copernicus services and the services, the core services of Copernicus are also in their new agreements are putting a lot more emphasis on uptake of their data products and services. And then finally, this new Knowledge Centre, which really is focused on the needs of EU policy and how we can kind of incentivize that. I mean, if I can just give you one example, one of my objectives would be that in 5 years' time, any new piece of legislation that could make use of Copernicus should be making use of it. And it should be explicitly referenced, and that should be the basis for developing the services and eventually developing downstream services which can kind of contribute to the general needs around that implementation of that policy area. So I just want to mention those different areas on the side. First of all, to show you that there are some key competences on different aspects from different entities, whether it be USPA, the member states, the services, or the KCEO, but also to say in general that I think there's really an increased emphasis on this. So maybe I'll pause for a minute, Jeff. I do have quite a lot of other material, including on implementation and some things, but just to see if there's anything you wanted to come back on at this point.
I have to come off mute to speak. No, there's a lot I want to come back on, and there's a few questions starting to appear as well. Can you, is it possible to say a bit what the KCEO will look like? What will people be able to find and see there? Will they see EO services? Will they see examples of services? Will they see reports that say how to use? Is it just a sort of a network of people who will be ready to advise on services? What concretely will it look like?
I mean, did I mute myself? Am I still online? Can't see. No, I'm still. You can hear me still, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so I mean, I'd say it's kind of, well, firstly, maybe I'll say what you won't see. So it's not about establishing new data portals or new kind of interfaces to Copernicus data or things like this. I think what you will see, well, I mean, at a fairly practical level, we have a website. That website will be kind of our shop window as we start. At the moment, it has just some background material, but as we're starting the activities now, things will be put on there. There will be a certain number of assessments and reports, and that maybe I'll come into a bit more detail, the type of products we're thinking about. We have kind of a set of core activities which we're starting up, which will be on top of the working groups that maybe I'll spend a bit more time on later. And these core activities will address things, will provide resources, let's say, on things like, it will make one ambition fairly early on is to make really a fairly in-depth assessment of past research, EU research projects on Earth observation back maybe the last 2 or 3 framework programs, so maybe back to FP6 at least or something like that, where we really start to kind of analyze the underlying consortia, topics, making the links to different policy areas they may have addressed, and showing traceability where these have then fed into research, into core services or into more operational settings afterwards. And the idea there is really to kind of have a maintained overview of the landscape of research investments in Earth observation in Europe, and show how, in many cases, or in cases at least, this has kind of resulted in developing services that are providing support to policy, but also to kind of inform especially for the ongoing projects and recent projects, to inform our colleagues in the policy DGs of what opportunities are out there that may be of interest to them, and that then we can see how to kind of bring into the more sustained production. So that's just one example. Another thing, just as a specific product that we're thinking about, is kind of almost like an annotated Earth observation annotated legislation. So imagine a new communication or directive or regulation. We would go through that and really kind of annotate it so that we explain to people what the implications are for monitoring and observations from Earth observation satellites, and where maybe the opportunities are to kind of address certain aspects of that policy area. And then at the moment, we're kind of doing these background assessments before we start, of course, the serious discussions with the user DGs themselves, where we kind of go through, and you'll see maybe in a couple of slides when I show you that we also have this idea of always showing the colleagues, both from the external community and the policy DGs themselves, the value chain of how the information flow is basically reverse engineered from a specific policy need, to look at what applications and services needed to support that, to look at what products are needed to underpin those services, and ultimately what the observing system is. Both because we think this is a way to kind of almost educate the colleagues on the necessity of certain observations and how they may think of using this, but also to help us understand where evolution in that value chain is needed to be more fit for purpose for what we want to address. I said before that the ambition of the KCEO is not to kind of provide additional portals, but we do have in mind, where necessary, to provide dashboards to existing data sets and resources that may be of more specific interest to policy and decision making. And to expose that as well through our website. So that won't be done systematically, but for certain case studies, with the expectation that maybe in the long run that could be transitioned into one of the operational services as well. On the reports, we do plan to establish kind of a report series, and actually we're starting our initial deep dive assessment will be on biodiversity. So I suspect that will be one of the first reports published. And all of these resources will be publicly available, and really they should provide a fairly in-depth assessment of the policy needs across all of the Commission services in that thematic area, really going from identification of the needs to kind of translating those into quantitative requirements for products and services, and then ultimately thinking about what the implications are for the upstream value chain as far as what the observing system that is needed to underpin and sustain that. So yeah, that's another example that or that's kind of the type of material that will be in our report series. On the research and innovation pillar that I mentioned, and this is probably also of interest to the colleagues online, the ambition there is to kind of establish a kind of a longer term strategy for research and innovation priorities that we would try and publish kind of once or twice, sorry, in a framework program, to really kind of provide some overview of what kind of priority areas that we should need to invest in on Earth observation, with the understanding that between these two pillars you see on the screen, there's obviously a link, in the sense that a part of the prioritization of research and innovation will be to make sure that we're better addressing new policy areas that need kind of further development. So yeah, I would say that's some examples. As far as, so that's kind of the external view. As far as engagement, I would have a few other things to say from the external community, but yeah, I'll pass back to you, and then maybe I can go for.
Yeah, I do think this is a very important area, and I mean, I would like to carry on and talk a bit more about the some of the findings that we have in the work that we do under SEBS, where we're looking at directly at some of these issues, recently looking at water quality. But let me respect a bit the audience and not take it in that direction, because there's a number of questions coming up. And before turning to questions, I think one question that is probably 80% of the audience are wanting to ask is, what about industry? Is there anything that industry can do to support? Are you looking to get support from industry? Does industry have, will it be access? You said it will be public access, so the information will be available. Is there a role for industry in all this?
Yeah. So, okay, maybe if you don't mind, Jeff, I will show a few more slides just
okay.
to make this point. Okay, so first of all, I won't go into detail on this, but I think an important point that we've seen out of the initial discussions, and it's something that we need to, I would say this really in general terms as an Earth observation community in general, so including all of you, is really, I think in the past we've thought a lot about policy implementation in deriving products and services from Earth observation. I really think we need to kind of get beyond that and think much more how Earth observation can contribute to many different areas of the policy cycle. And that's going to be really a strong part of a lot of the discussions at the beginning with the DGs as well. It's really understanding from anticipation forward how Earth observation can really make contributions. But to come to Jeff's question, so I'll address this from 2 points of view. First of view, just to give you an overview kind of the general governance of the Knowledge Centre, and then I'll talk about the working group specifically, because I think that's so okay. The Knowledge Centre has this steering group that I mentioned before, and at our first steering group meeting we had 17 DGs. Okay, admittedly that includes JRC and DEFIS, so say 15 DGs on top of JRC and DEFIS. We have a secretariat, which is basically the JRC with some contributions from DEFIS and largely based here at the JRC. Really, the core of the work is going to be, apart from some of the kind of ongoing background activities I mentioned before, a core of the work is really going to be on establishing these working groups. And we will have, I would say, two broad categories of working groups. Ones that are looking at deep dives on specific policy areas, and I'll come to that process in a minute, because that's also an area where I see engagement from external stakeholders, including from industry. And then a second category, which is more focused on what I would say are more kind of transversal issues, such as this topic on research and innovation, defining a research and innovation strategy, as well as maybe in the future looking at data systems and interfaces. And I think the key thing to understand is these are not just kind of like JRC working groups. In each of these working groups, there should be all of the relevant DGs, representation from all of the relevant DGs that have an interest in there. We will also bring in, of course, the Copernicus entrusted entities, because they have a direct interest, or they have a direct dialogue already in many cases with some of these DGs, but they're not going to be interested in all of them, and at least not all of the services, but where it's relevant, we would bring them in. And then there'll be opportunities on a periodic basis to kind of engage with the broader Earth observation community, maybe through workshops or conferences, and I'll provide a specific example of how we see this happening through this. This is kind of just a very brief outline of how we plan to undertake these deep dives on specific policy areas. So first of all, we have a dialogue with the different relevant policy views. As you see below, we're starting with a pilot on biodiversity. So imagine, of course, DG Environment will be interested, but also agriculture, climate, MARE for the marine aspects, RIGO. So a broad range of DGs having an interest, and we have various workshops and discussions with them, assessing their needs, going through, as I said before, value chain assessment, and then making a translation of these needs into requirements. At that point, then we need to start looking at what's available and as far as addressing these needs. And of course, we look within the Copernicus, kind of the current Copernicus program at the services. But the intention is that at that point, we would also open up to a dialogue with the broader community, having interests in those areas, including with industry, to understand if this isn't existing at the moment in Copernicus, are there existing fit for purpose products and services to address these needs outside, or are there other suggestions or proposals to, so really to have a dialogue on both from a product, service and infrastructure point of view, what is really needed to address that specific policy requirement. And then after that, we bring all of that together and basically made a gap analysis and recommendations for future evolution, both at the level of services, ground segment and space segment. So that's, as I said, that transition from point 3 into point 4, and then really that dialogue in point 4, to me is a key area where we would engage with the broader community, including industry.
So services that are offered by industry will be not promoted, but will be available for recognition by the different DGs, the agencies that are implementing largely the legislation around Europe, and they would then be informed on the availability of these services.
And maybe in some case, I mean, if it's a clear gap that needs to be also addressed through the core service, then we think how in the evolution of the program these are brought into consideration. I mean, I mean, I think it's similar to the discussion that's ongoing at the moment on how we bring kind of some of the high resolution kind of Earth observation data sets into a more kind of wall-to-wall mapping of data. So I mean, that it's kind of in that spirit, I would say, is that of course we look initially within the program to see if we have things that are fit for purpose, but when that's not the case, then we open up straight away to get input from the broader community, and I mean suggestions as well. Maybe it's not something that's ready off the shelf, but that people have already been thinking about it.
We host a number of working groups. There is a group focused on the Green Deal at the moment, which has separate subgroups looking at different aspects of farming, of carbon, of methane. And
I think to me, one of the, because I mean, of course, you know, this is nothing new. People have been speaking to the policy DGs for the last 15 years. What I see as something that's a little special in the case of the Knowledge Centre is that when we address one of these topics, we will be bringing together all of the relevant DGs that have an interest on that. It means that we start also to address some things where Earth observation is really a good tool as well for policy coherence. If we're using kind of consistent products, metrics, and standards in providing data for different policy purposes, but on the same area and the same thematic area, then that's I think of greater benefit for everyone. And I think that dialogue across the DGs within the Knowledge Centre will be something that has a huge potential.
I'm sure that industry is willing to support, and ERSC is willing to help organise that. There are a number of questions in the chat, a number of questions and points being raised by Emmanuel Monno. I'm not quite sure if you're in a position to answer his core question, but Emmanuel, do you want to come in?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Jen. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon, Emmanuel.
We already exchanged a bit on this topic in the past days during the Copernicus and the Green Deal workshop held yesterday and the day before. I'm super concerned regarding the gap I see between the space world, and let's focus on the Earth observation world, and the data spaces world. Namely Destination Earth and CFC data access. It's a lot of money, and that's fine. But this investment should leverage usage of information derived from Earth observation and space assets by non-space experts, non-space users. And for me, the perfect vehicle for addressing those guys should be the various data spaces. And when I'm speaking on both sides, DG Connect and data spaces guys, and DG Defis, ESA, SMWF, METSAT, and space guys, nobody is taking care of the in-between, the interfaces between the space assets and the data spaces. And my question is, do you think KCEO is relevant for tackling this topic? I was happy to see that you have a working group on data systems and interfaces. Maybe that's the relevant working group. I don't know. So I'm raising a flag. I'm trying to explain this gap to any guys willing to hear me. And I hope KCEO could help. Thanks.
Yeah. Actually, ironically, the working group on data systems and interfaces won't be starting up straight away for a very simple reason that, of course, as you know, the Destination Earth contracts have now been put in place, and there are starting initial discussions now with the various expert groups, expert advisory groups, and also some internal groups in the Commission. By the way, I do think the dialogue there is very good between Connect, DEFIS, well, DGRTD and ourselves. So that's relevant, of course, to the Destination Earth and Copernicus interface, as it were. So we're not going to start with that working group initially until we understand what is basically missing, and maybe the points you're making are one of the gaps with these other internal coordination mechanisms and external advisory groups that are being set up at the moment. I take your point, although I would also pass it back and say that when I kind of speak to some of the colleagues involved in some of the different data spaces, I have the impression that there are different understandings in the different kind of thematic policy areas of what the individual data spaces are about and what they're going to do. So it's not my, or maybe it's just that I haven't been talking to the right people, but my impression is that there are kind of different interpretations on health, on transport, on how the different data, what the purpose and intention is of the different data spaces. So I think for the Green Deal, the understanding and discussions that we have with Connect and DEFIS on the interface there, that's quite well understood now. Although there are still, of course, some nuances in the boundaries between what the core services are delivering and what may come out of the digital twins, but okay, I'm sure that will be resolved in time. I do completely agree with your point on kind of making sure that it doesn't fall through the gaps on the interfaces need to be kind of fit for purpose for non-Earth observation technical colleagues. And I think that's, I think as I responded to you yesterday or the day before, that is definitely consistent, at least with our ambition in the Knowledge Center. I mean, I mentioned before that, you know, a lot of these dashboards and interfaces we would develop for the user DGs. They definitely don't have to be Earth observation specialists to access that. And we're not going to reinvent any of the backends ourselves. I mean, we're going to interface to existing data systems, the Copernicus services where relevant, and kind of just tailor the front end so it's kind of fit for purpose for the specific policy needs. But okay, I mean, I think this is something maybe we can discuss more in detail. I do take your point that there may be a gap that perhaps the KCEO could contribute to. As I said, at least the dialogue around Destination Earth and the Green Deal data space is quite I think is going quite well.
Okay, thank you. Happy to take it offline. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Jeff, back to you. Jeff, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I put on mute to cut out the background noise. I was just, well, thank you to you and to Emmanuel. And then I was going to turn to Andy Coote, who has a very straightforward question, which is framed in the context of the UK, but I guess is broader in the sense of you know, third party and non-EU organizations access. Andy, do you want to come in? Or have I framed the question well enough, the way it's written? So are UK businesses able to access the KCEO?
Well, I mean, I mean, everyone is able to access the KCEO as far as kind of read our reports or even come to our meetings. I mean, come to these open meetings that we would plan to have. I don't see, I think it will be open even to our international partners apart from in the European space. So I don't see, I mean, the working group meetings, at least initially, especially because we, of course, we want to build this rapport with the DGs, that's going to be initially restricted to the DGs and eventually the entrusted entities. But once we start organizing these open fora, and maybe even some dedicated discussions, for example, with ERSC or other kind of community coordination mechanisms, then I don't see any reason why we should be excluding anyone from those discussions.
Okay.
And by the way, we also plan to bring in some experts to support us on some of these working groups, and also in those cases, it's not only restricted to EU 27.
Okay, that's perhaps a subject to come back to. An interesting question from Crayon about civil society and the engagement. Patrick?
Hello, thanks for taking my question. I'm interested mainly, I mean, there's been a recent phenomenon, I guess, over the last 10 years of, in particular, youth groups involved in activism on the climate, to some extent acting as a watchdog on the protection of nature and issues related to pollution. Sometimes they're very proactive in terms of, you know, recently cleaning up beaches and things like this. So I've been wondering to what extent are these groups using Earth observation tools, and to what extent is Copernicus and these programs able to support them, or is it on the radar for the moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, there are, if you look, a number of, I was trying to think of a couple of good examples, but a number of these kind of community-based systems. I remember, what's I can never remember the names, but there was one with the surf, like the water quality measurements and things that are done by these surfer networks. I can't remember what.
Surfers Against Sewage, perhaps.
That's it, Surfers Against Sewage, yeah. I remember that they were using Copernicus information, for example, on coastal turbidity, on things like this, and integrating it with their applications and front end, so that the same is true. I think for some of the air quality measurements, there are some simple, so there are lots, and by the way, I should say our colleagues in RTD have also on several occasions funded research projects that have really been targeting this. So really connecting kind of NGO and citizen type science networks together with Earth observation to create integrated products. From our side specifically, I have in mind two things that I think are relevant. One is, I mentioned that our first deep dive is on biodiversity, and it's really well known that, of course, a lot of the in situ data is actually not gathered by public agencies or public governments, but is gathered by NGOs. I mean, a lot of the biodiversity data is actually in the NGO space, the in situ data. So by necessity, there has to be a dialogue there, of course, if we want to integrate the Earth observation with these communities. And I think as we're starting to think of an expert group to support us for that deep dive, we will also have a couple of colleagues from the NGOs involved in that discussion. And then my final point is just more, this is more perhaps at the level of society. I think you were also referencing that at the beginning. We are thinking about how, I mean, we have the ambition of having eventually kind of a geographic news base of how people and where people are talking about Earth observation in Europe and maybe even globally eventually. And we would also bring social media into that so that people can kind of understand. We can use that almost as a ground truthing for certain things, but also to kind of promote their awareness of how Earth observation can be integrated with their kind of daily life in doing that. So that's perhaps not kind of our core business, but it's something that we see as an information stream, at least integrating it with our kind of more traditional news assessments and news kind of scanning of relevant news, let's say.
Great, thank you.
And by the way, I should say again, just to be clear, because I know people are going to say, well, you're reinventing the wheel. In all of these cases, both on kind of the news and events that we kind of promote on the website and things, we really always do this looking at it through the lens of Earth observation, yes, but Earth observation relevant to policy. Yeah? So we don't have the ambition of kind of duplicating things that are being very well done by people with many more resources than we have. So our focus is always really on Earth observation as it pertains to policy. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. So you've just talked about the access to in situ data and the gathering of in situ data related to biodiversity and how that's often NGOs. And on the bottom of the slide that you've got on the screen, it tantalizingly talks about the pilot on biodiversity, which has obviously triggered the question from Ana Maria de Souza, who is asking if you can describe it a bit further. Is there anything you want to amplify on that, Ana Maria? Do you want to explain a little bit more what you're interested in? Ana Maria? No? Okay, so
anyway, I mean, just to say, I think the operational word there, Jeff, is pilot. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, this is really, we've kind of set up a protocol that I've worked together with my colleague Andrea Camilla, who, by the way, is also online. He's kind of my partner in crime in this, and there's also a colleague, Ilaria, who has just started with us as an apprentice on a traineeship, and she's actually going to be working with Andrea specifically on this pilot on biodiversity. But we've come up with this protocol, and really, it's really about testing this together with, and really also testing how we implement this dialogue with the user DGs. Biodiversity we picked as a pilot. Of course, it's very relevant to the Green Deal. It can bring in a nice number of commission DGs across different areas, so that's good. And it's not too controversial, I don't think, at least, as an area to start off with. So we thought, and of course, we also launched, I should mention this is important, we launched just 6 months before the KCEO a knowledge center at the JRC on biodiversity. So we'll be working with our colleagues on that as well, who are involved in that process as well.
Well, that's good. That's excellent. And of course, it's a very diverse subject. So as you say, it could touch many DGs and many different policy areas. So yeah, it's good luck with that one, I think.
Well, we may be knocking on your door sooner rather than later. Anyway, I think I didn't mention on the timeline for these deep dives. I mean, we see them lasting between 6 and 8 months. So I think as far as having a public consultation on this, it will probably come either just before or just after the summer.
Okay. I mean, the dog's been released, I'm afraid. I shut her outside. I think we've come to the end of our time. Let me just thank you very much again. Is there anything you want to say to finish? Let me give the floor to you.
Yeah, maybe just to say that yeah, I hope to be able to kind of continue to engage with us as we develop the activities. We do have this website where we're starting to put some background information on. But I said this at a recent meeting of, for example, the EOcafe project. I know some of you are involved in, and also said this when I met with your board last month. If there are ever kind of, well, we often link already to things that you kind of put up as news and things, but if there are specific pieces that you think you'd like to highlight on the page, or even kind of feature items that we could develop together, then I'm very open to discussing that. So either through Jeff or Emmanuel or Delphine, you can get in touch with us on that, definitely.
For sure. Okay. If is there anything else you wanted to put up? You had another few slides, I know.
Yeah,
but
I mean, by the way, I am going to rearrange. Maybe just to mention, there are a couple of kind of, I would say, more background things that are going on that may be of interest to you. One is that we're trying to define as a very first step with the other DGs kind of a common typology for policy areas. So this will allow us to kind of structure the work over the years and come up with kind of a roadmap of how and when we address different areas for the next 2 or 3 years. But I think it's also quite useful for the community, especially if this is kind of validated by the Commission DGs and really understanding both the granularity and the different divisions that they see in dividing up policy areas specifically related to Earth observation applications. So that's something that we have a first proposal on, and we're going to start discussing now with the policy DGs. And by the way, we're also discussing this with the colleagues at USPA, so that when they implement their kind of policy assessment more from the synergistic point of view of the space program, that we're using consistent kind of subdivisions for that. And then the second, which is related in a sense, is you saw that the deep dives, a big part of it is also defining kind of, or translating the needs into these quantitative requirements. We obviously have existing user requirement databases that were prepared for the staff working document and by the individual services over the years. And we really want to use the KCEO to really kind of standardize that process and format of collecting user requirements. And so we're kind of working around this ourselves, and then hope to have a discussion with the entrusted entities and with USPA to understand how that can also be standardized. And I think that should also be a benefit to the broader community, in that you also, for your external downstream applications, you'll kind of be receiving these requirements in a fairly standardized fashion. So these are perhaps more kind of boring background activities, but I think in the long run they could be useful as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. We'll keep the cafe open if people want to join in, and if they have other questions. I don't know if Mark's able to stay, but just to thank you again for spending the time with us this afternoon, for helping to explain, and hopefully people now have a better idea what the KCEO is. I think there are a number of questions that spin out, which it would be good to discuss another time. So maybe we'll come back to this as a subject a little bit later and invite you back in to explain a little bit more of some of these subjects. But that's something we can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear to everyone that it's we're learning as we're doing at the moment. So there'll definitely be opportunities once we've gone through these first exercises to come back to you and say, okay, we're still doing this, but we've had to adjust a bit based on how things have gone with these first assessments.
Yeah, and we're here to act as an interface, or ERSC is here to act as an interface. So don't hesitate. So at that point, we'll close the sort of formal part of the EOcafe. The whole thing is very informal. The next EOcafe will be in 2 weeks' time. I talked about our second anniversary, but in fact, that I was getting a little bit ahead of myself, because it will be the 21st of April is our real 2-year anniversary EOcafe. The next EOcafe, do we have a slide on it? Is somebody, or we? So I think we have the next EOcafe fixed.
Yes, it's on. You don't see it.
No, we don't see it. No.
Maybe I have to unshare. Hang on.
No, because I'm sharing it. It's very weird.
There we go. So
okay.
We're coming back to the topic of artificial intelligence. It's a topic that people keep asking us about. So there's obviously a great deal of interest about this, the technology, how it can be applied. There are a number of funding opportunities open at the moment, which is why we will take this this subject next time around, because the number of opportunities that are closing around about the end of April. So join us in 2 weeks' time to learn more about where the opportunities to find funds for linking artificial intelligence and EO. And at that point, let me close the formal part, and please, anyone, as you know now, anyone can just open their microphone and say anything they wish, and within reason, of course, and join in the discussion.